Arizona Territory, 1879. The desert didn't care if you lived or died. Flint Keaton knew that better than most. The sun had been burning overhead for hours, a white blaze cutting through the blue sky. His boots kicked up dust as he led his mare along a narrow ravine, scouting for signs of strayed cattle. He had not planned to be this far west, but the herd had spooked 2 nights back, and he was not about to let his boss dock his pay over lost stock. Then he saw her. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a pale shape slumped against the canyon wall, half hidden behind a fallen mesquite branch. But when he got closer, he saw the blood on her sleeve, the cracked lips, the faint rise and fall of her chest. "Hey," he said, dropping to one knee beside her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. They were a deep green, clouded with pain and sun exhaustion. "Water," she whispered. He grabbed the canteen from his saddle, lifting her head gently and letting her sip. She drank too fast, then coughed, and he steadied her. "What happened?" he asked, looking over her torn riding skirt and the dark bruise blooming across her temple. "Horse threw me," she said hoarsely. "2 days ago. I got turned around." "You're lucky I came through here," Flint said, eyeing the way her hands trembled. "You would have been dead by nightfall." "Maybe that would have been easier," she muttered, closing her eyes. "Not on my watch." He worked quick. He wrapped her arm, checked her head, then lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, and her body went limp against his chest. He mounted his horse, cradling her in front of him, and turned toward the town of Willow Ridge, 20 miles north. The ride was long. He gave her water in sips, talked to her to keep her awake. She told him her name, Prudence Farrow. She was 22, from a ranch farther east, headed west to visit her uncle in Tucson. She had been traveling alone. Flint did not ask why, but something about the hollow way she said it told him there was more behind that story. By the time they reached Willow Ridge, the sun had dropped low and Prudence was half unconscious again. Flint carried her into the doctor's office, his arms aching but steady. Doc Merritt looked up from his desk and raised his brows. "What in the hell happened?" "Found her in a ravine," Flint said. "She needs help." The doctor went to work and Flint stayed. He sat in the corner of the room while Doc cleaned the cuts, stitched her arm, checked her pulse. He watched her breathe, slow and shallow, her brow damp with fever. "She'll live," Doc said after a while. "But she's weak, starving, dehydrated. And that bruise on her head, she's lucky you got to her." Flint nodded. "Can I stay?" Doc gave him a long look. "You know her?" "No. But I couldn't just leave her out there." The doctor sighed. "Fine. But if she wakes up screaming, you settle her down." Flint nodded again. She woke before dawn. Flint was dozing in a wooden chair beside the bed, his hat tipped low over his face. He heard her shift, then a sharp intake of breath. "You're all right," he said gently, sitting up and adjusting his hat. "The doc says you'll pull through." Her eyes met his. "You stayed. I figured you might not want to wake up alone." She studied him. "Thank you." He nodded. "You got folks who need to know you're safe?" Prudence looked away. "No," he waited. She did not say more and he did not push. Prudence stayed in town for 2 weeks. The doc let her rest in the spare room while she got her strength back. Flint checked in every day. He brought her food from the cafe, cornbread, stew, whatever he could afford. They talked. Not always much, but enough. She had a quiet way about her, like someone who had learned not to expect much from people. One afternoon, as he set down a bowl of beans, she looked up at him. "Why are you still here?" He shrugged. "You needed help. I am not your problem." "Maybe not. But I do not like walking away from people who need someone." She was quiet a moment, then said, You always this kind? No, he admitted. Not for a long time. What changed? Maybe you did. She blinked, startled. He stood. I will be back tomorrow. It was not long before the townsfolk started talking. Flint Keaton, the ranch hand who kept to himself, was suddenly hanging around the doc's office with a look in his eye that had not been there before. And Prudence, the quiet girl with the green eyes and stitched-up arm, was looking at him like maybe she believed in people again. One evening, she stood outside the doc's office, watching the sun go down. Flint walked up beside her. Feeling better? Much. They stood in silence for a beat, the desert wind tugging at her hair. You are not going back east, are you? He asked. She shook her head. There is nothing for me there. He nodded. You could stay. Willow Ridge is not much, but it is honest. She looked at him. And you? I have been here a while. Never had a reason to leave. She held his gaze. Maybe now you do. Flint's heart kicked hard in his chest. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of wind-blown hair from her cheek. She leaned into his hand, her eyes soft. You saved me, she said. I think you are saving me right back. Then she kissed him. It was slow, certain, and when she pulled back, Flint was already smiling. I do not know what this is yet, she said, voice low. But I know it matters. He touched her cheek. It matters to me too. And in that quiet sunset, with the dust swirling golden around them, the cowboy who had once walked alone and the woman who had nearly died in the desert began something real, something they both believed in. Prudence pressed the back of her hand to her forehead as she stepped into the shade behind Willow Ridge's dry goods store. The morning sun was already fierce, and the hem of her borrowed skirt clung damply to her calves. She glanced down the road where the blacksmith's hammer rang against iron, the sound sharp and steady. I was wondering where you'd wandered off to. Flint's voice came from behind her, low and even. She turned as he approached, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, a coil of rawhide rope slung loose over one shoulder. His hat shaded his eyes, but she could still make out the quiet curve in his expression. I needed to walk, she said. Stretch my legs, clear my head. You're not supposed to be out in the heat too long yet. I'm not made of glass. No, he said, stepping beside her. But you were close to fading out for good not long ago. That kind of thing doesn't shake off easy. Prudence didn't answer right away. A wagon rolled past, its wheels creaking, and a child's laughter drifted from the direction of the boarding house. She watched the dust rise behind the wagon, then said, I remember lying there, thinking no one would find me. My mouth was so dry I thought I'd gone dumb. You didn't, Flint said gently. You made it. I didn't do that alone. She looked up at him, the wind teasing loose strands of hair across her cheek. You never asked what I was running from. Didn't seem like something you'd offer unless you were ready. Prudence folded her arms. I left because I said no, and someone didn't like hearing it. A man my father owed money to decided I'd do as payment. Said I'd marry him or watch what happened to my family's land. Flint's jaw flexed once. Your father agreed to that? He died before he could stop it. Consumption took him last winter. My brothers were long gone, and my mother's buried back in Kansas. I walked away while the man was off chasing cattle contracts. Took the mare and didn't look behind me. You thought Tucson would be safer? I thought a different name in a different town might be enough. She unclasped her arms, let them fall. I didn't count on the desert turning mean on me. Flint leaned a shoulder against the wall beside her, quiet for a beat. Sometimes the land wants to see what you're made of. Sometimes people do too. She turned to him. And what do you see when you look at me? I see someone who didn't break. They stood there as the town moved slow around them, the sun creeping higher. A man led a mule past the livery, and two women exchanged cloth bolts outside the mercantile. Prudence watched it all with a kind of stillness that hadn't come easy. "I've been thinking I might stay a while," she said. Flint's brow lifted slightly. "You sure? I've done enough running. I want something that holds still." He looked at her then, long and quiet. "There's a room behind the cafe. Mrs. Landry rents it by the month. It's not much, but it's clean." "And the cafe?" she asked. "She could use help in the mornings. Her hands are getting stiff. I've never worked in a cafe before. You think I was born knowing how to mend fence?" He tipped his hat back slightly. "You learn. If you want it, I'll ask her." "I'd like that." They turned back toward the road, their steps falling in rhythm. Prudence watched as a man on horseback slowed to nod at Flint, then rode on toward the west edge of town. "Do you always keep so much to yourself?" she asked after a moment. "You asking as a friend or something else?" She glanced over at him, her expression unreadable. "Maybe both." Flint scratched his jaw. "My ma died when I was young. My father didn't do well with that. I left home early, drifted a while. Worked cattle, laid rail, kept moving. I guess I figured if I didn't get close, I couldn't get hurt. But you stayed here." "I did." She nodded to herself, then said, "I don't want to be afraid of staying anymore." Flint reached for her hand. His was rough and calloused, but steady in a way that grounded her. She let her fingers curl into his. "You don't have to be," he said. They walked together through the heart of Willow Ridge, past the hitching posts and the cracked boardwalks, past the places where people knew each other by name. And when they reached the edge of the cafe, where the smell of coffee and cornmeal drifted through the open window, Prudence looked up at him. "Ask Mrs. Landry," she said. Flint nodded once and stepped through the door ahead of her. She followed, the bell overhead giving a soft ring as it closed behind them. By late April, the mesquite trees had begun to leaf out, and the mornings carried the scent of warming earth and wild onion. Prudence stood behind the counter of the cafe, her apron dusted with flour, sleeves rolled to the elbows as she kneaded biscuit dough. Her hands moved with quiet purpose, her brow furrowed in thought. Mrs. Landry had taken to sitting more often since Prudence started, offering tips between sips of chicory coffee while letting her joints rest. "You work like someone who's got something to prove," the older woman had said once. Prudence hadn't answered, but she'd felt the truth of it settle somewhere behind her ribs. Across the road, Flint leaned against the hitch rail outside the mercantile, speaking with the supply clerk about fence wire and seed sacks. The sun lit the dust in his hair, and his shirt sleeves were streaked with sweat from the morning's ride out to the southern ridge. He caught sight of Prudence through the open cafe window, and though he didn't wave, the look they exchanged said enough. That evening, they walked out past the edge of town, where the ground sloped gently down toward a wash scattered with cottonwoods. A creek ran dry through most of the year, but the spring rains had brought it back briefly, and the sound of water slipping over stone filled the hush between them. "I've been thinking," Prudence said, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. "I want to buy that room from Mrs. Landry outright. Not rent. Make it mine." Flint stopped beside a weathered cedar, his hand trailing over its gray bark. "You planning to stay that long?" She looked at him then, steady and sure. "I'm not drifting anymore." He nodded, thoughtful. "You'll need coin for that. I've saved most of what you paid for the doctor's bill. Mrs. Landry says she'll lower the price if I help her through the summer." Flint crouched near the creek bed, picking a smooth stone from the water. "You've got grit. Most folks don't carry that quiet kind. Quiet's the only kind I've got left." He stood again, brushing his palms together. "I've been offered a foreman's spot. Mr. Halston wants to head north, and he says I've earned his trust." "That's good," she said, her voice low. "You'll take it." "I will. But it means I'd have to settle more. Make plans. She turned to him fully. Is that something you want? Flint studied her. The way her fingers curled into her shawl. The way dusk softened the edge of her jaw. I used to think I didn't need anything more than a horse and a trail. Then I found you in that ravine, and everything changed. She stepped closer, her boots crunching against dry leaves. You didn't just find me, Flint. You carried me out. I reckon you've carried me just as far, he said, voice rougher now. She reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation, their fingers fitting together like they'd done it 100 times. If I stay, she said, it can't be just me trying to hold steady. I need to know you're right there with me. I won't leave you wondering, he said. Not ever. They stood together as darkness crept over the land, the sky turning violet above the cottonwoods. A nightjar called once in the distance, and the creek murmured on. Flint turned toward town, her hand still in his. Come on, he said. Mrs. Landry'll be fretting if you're late for supper. Prudence glanced back once at the water, then followed him, step for step, toward the warm light of windows and the promise of a shared life beginning to take shape. The summer heat came early that year. By the first days of May, the ground in Willow Ridge baked hard by noon, and horses sweated through their hides before the second bell. Prudence rose before sunup now, kneading dough by lantern light, her hair pinned up with a bone comb Mrs. Landry had given her as a gift after she signed the bill of sale for the back room. Flint had helped carry the iron frame cot inside. He hadn't said much, only rolled up his sleeves and steadied the headboard while she pressed her palms flat against the wall, deciding where to place it. When they were done, he'd stood in the doorway for a long moment before saying, "You've got a home now." She hadn't answered, but the way her fingertips lingered on the edge of the quilt said enough. That evening, after the cafe closed and the streets quieted, they walked out past the stock pens to a rise where the land opened wide. A breeze moved through the juniper and caught the edge of her shawl. Prudence sat first, gathering her skirts beneath her, and Flint eased down beside her, his left boot leaving a faint trail in the dust. "I saw something today," she said, brushing grit from her sleeve. A woman came in with 3 children. Her hands were raw. Said she's been digging irrigation ditches herself. Flint adjusted the brim of his hat. Her husband gone? Died of snakebite last month. She said she's hoping to hang on through harvest. He didn't speak right away, only looked out over the low hills, where the last of the sun pooled gold in the creases. "I remember a woman like that," he said finally, "back when I worked near the Brazos. Her name was Lena. She lost her man in a flash flood. Wound up keeping the homestead with just a mule and her boy. Folks said she wouldn't make it, but when I left 2 years later, she was still there. Tough as dried hide." "Do you think that's what makes someone stay?" Prudence asked. "Stubbornness? Maybe. Or maybe it's hope dressed up as grit." She folded her hands in her lap. "I spent so long thinking I had to run to survive. But now, when I stand behind that counter and feel the floor steady beneath my feet, it's different. Like I'm not just passing through anymore." Flint looked over at her. "You aren't." They sat in the hush that followed, the kind that settled into the bones. Far off, a coyote called once, sharp against the darkening sky. "I've been fixing up that old lean-to behind the bunkhouse," Flint said. "Dug a trench for water runoff. Built in shelves for tools." Prudence turned toward him. "You planning to stay on the ranch proper?" "I was thinking about building something more. Not grand, just a start." She held his gaze. "For you, or for both of us? I don't want to build anything you're not ready to be part of." "I'm ready." He nodded once, slow and sure. "Then it's for both of us." They lingered until the stars came out, one by one, like old stories being told again. As they rose to leave, Prudence reached for his hand, and he laced his fingers with hers. Neither of them said another word on the walk back. They didn't need to. The next morning, before the rooster crowed, Flint rode out early to the ridge. He had timber to haul, nails to count, and a foundation to mark. Prudence watched him go from the cafe window, the light catching the edge of his shoulder as he passed the livery. She turned back to her kneading board, dusted her hands in flour, and began shaping the first batch of biscuits. Her movements were steady, her breath even. The sun hadn't come up yet, but the oil lamp glowed warm, and the room smelled like promise. She didn't hum, didn't smile, didn't speak. But everything about the way she moved said one thing. She was home. The floorboards creaked under Prudence's boots as she stepped into the half-built frame of what Flint had started calling the house. Not a cabin, not a shack, just the house. The walls stood waist-high now, rough pine laid true, each corner square. She ran her hand along the edge of a window frame, the wood warm from the sun. Flint stood a few yards away, hitching a beam into place with quiet precision. Sweat darkened the back of his shirt, and sawdust clung to the cuffs of his trousers. He didn't look up when she entered, but his voice carried easily. "You think that window'll catch the morning light?" She stepped over the threshold, careful not to catch her hem on the loose floorboard near the back. "It faces east. You'll wake up with the sun in your eyes." "I don't mind. Gives me a reason to get up." She leaned her weight against the low frame. "I was talking with Mrs. Landry about closing the cafe early on Sundays. She says most folks don't mind, and the extra hours would give me time to help you here." He set the beam down, stretched out his back, and looked over at her. "You sure you want to spend your one quiet afternoon swinging a hammer? If it means building something that's ours?" "I do." Flint crossed the space between them in a few strides. His hands were rough and warm as they settled against her waist. "You still think about leaving sometimes?" She looked up at the empty sky above where the roof would be. "No. Not anymore." They stood like that until the wind shifted and brought in the scent of sage from the hills. Then Prudence pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and held it out. "This came in on the morning freight. It's from the land office." Flint unfolded it, his eyes scanning the sheet. "They approved the claim?" "They did. You own it outright now. No one can take it from you." His fingers tightened around the paper for a moment, then loosened. "This land was just dirt and mesquite until you came along." She smiled but didn't look away. "You were always rooted here. You just needed something worth growing toward." He folded the letter and tucked it inside his shirt. "We'll finish the roof next week. After that, it's just doors, a stove, and whatever you want to put inside." "I've already started sewing curtains," she said. "Blue ones. They'll keep the worst of the light out in the afternoons." Later that evening, they sat on a split log near the edge of the property, watching the last light fade from the sky. Flint had brought a tin of beans and a wedge of cornbread wrapped in cloth, and Prudence poured water from a glass jug she'd brought from the cafe. They ate in easy silence, their shoulders brushing now and then. Flint said, "I've got a question." She wiped her hands on her skirt. "Ask it." "I want you to marry me." She looked at him for a long breath, her face unreadable. "You're not asking because it's expected?" "No," he said. "I'm asking because I wake up every morning thinking about you, and I go to sleep with your voice still in my head. I want you beside me in that house. I want to build every wall and every year with you." Prudence reached over and took his hand. "Then I'll marry you." They didn't kiss right away. Flint just rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, as the sounds of the desert settled around them, crickets in the scrub, the soft whoop of an owl far off. When their lips met, it was slow, certain, and full of a promise that needed no words. They were married the next month in the small chapel outside town. Mrs. Landry stood behind Prudence, straightening the collar on her dress. Flint wore his cleanest shirt, a new pair of boots, and a look of quiet awe. The preacher's words were simple, but when Prudence said yes, Flint's hands trembled just enough for her to notice. That night, they crossed the threshold of their finished house under a sky full of stars. The front room smelled of fresh sawn wood and beeswax. A small iron stove stood in one corner, and the curtains fluttered in the window. Flint lit the lamp with a match, and warm light filled the space. Prudence set her hand on the table he'd carved himself. "It's beautiful." Flint stepped behind her, arms circling her waist. "It's ours." They shared their first night as husband and wife on a straw-stuffed mattress, wrapped in a patchwork quilt Prudence had sewn from scraps of her old life. They whispered to each other about things they would plant: beans, squash, maybe corn, and what they would name the dog Flint said he'd find come autumn. Years passed, as they do. The land stayed dry, the sun stayed hard, but the house stood firm. They added a porch, then a chicken coop. Flint took on new hands at the ranch, and Prudence, when she wasn't tending the garden or mending clothes, taught letters to the neighbor's youngest boy. They didn't speak often of what came before, of the ravine, of the road that nearly ended her, of the years Flint spent drifting. But sometimes, when the wind came through the cottonwoods, they'd sit on the porch, and he'd reach for her hand, and she'd lean into him, and the silence between them would speak the whole truth. In the end, they didn't need more than what they built together. A life shaped by slow trust, long days, and a love that asked nothing but presence. And they lived that way, side by side, always steady, always home.